You're not a writer. You're embarrassing yourself. I'm the talented one. My sister's words hung in the air as she threw my notebook. 3 years of handwritten stories, my entire soul poured onto those pages, directly into the fireplace. I watched the flames consume everything I'd ever created while our family sat in silence, doing nothing to stop her. 1 year later, she walked into a Barnes & Noble and saw my face on a 20-foot banner. The store manager grabbed the microphone and announced, "Welcome, everyone, to the launch of Cassandra Wren's 5th consecutive New York Times bestseller." My sister ran out of the store crying. But revenge wasn't nearly as sweet as I thought it would be. Let me tell you why. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, my sister Julianne was always the talented one. She was 3 years older than me, and from the moment I could form memories, she made sure I knew my place in the family hierarchy. Julianne could sing. Julianne could dance. Julianne wrote poetry that made our mother weep with pride. Julianne was going to be famous someday, everyone said so. Me? I was the quiet one. The invisible middle child sandwiched between Julianne's brilliance and our younger brother Marcus's athletic achievements. I spent my childhood in the corner of my bedroom, scribbling stories in spiral notebooks while my family attended Julianne's recitals and Marcus's football games. My mother, Diana, was a frustrated artist herself. She'd given up her dreams of being a painter when she married my father, and she lived vicariously through Julianne's creative pursuits. Every poem Julianne wrote was framed and hung on the wall. Every short story she penned was photocopied and sent to relatives across the country. When I shyly showed my mother a story I'd written at age 10, a fantasy tale about a girl who discovered she could talk to animals, she barely glanced at it. "That's nice, Cassandra," she said, handing it back without reading past the first paragraph. "But don't get your hopes up about writing. That's really more of Julianne's thing." Julianne's thing. Those 2 words defined my entire childhood. I learned to write in secret. I filled notebook after notebook with stories, fantasy epics, mystery thrillers, romance novels, anything and everything that poured out of my imagination. I hid them under my mattress, in the back of my closet, inside hollowed-out textbooks. Writing was my escape, my therapy, my reason for breathing. But I never showed anyone. Not after what my mother said. Not after Julianne found one of my notebooks when I was 14 and read passages aloud at dinner, laughing at my childish attempts at storytelling. "Cassie thinks she's a writer," Julianne had announced, tears of laughter streaming down her face. "Listen to this." The moonlight cascaded through the window like liquid silver. Liquid silver. Who writes like that? My father had chuckled. My mother had shaken her head with a pitying smile. Marcus had just kept eating, oblivious. I'd grabbed the notebook from Julianne's hands and run to my room, sobbing. That night, I made a promise to myself: someday, I would prove them all wrong. After high school, Julianne went to a prestigious creative writing program at Columbia University. My parents spent their entire savings on her tuition, convinced she would become the next great American novelist. I went to community college. There was no money left for me, and besides, my mother said, "What would be the point? You're not going to do anything creative with your life." I worked 2 jobs, waitressing at a diner and stocking shelves at a grocery store, while taking night classes in business administration. Practical. Safe. Exactly what my family expected of me. But every night, after my shifts ended and my homework was done, I wrote. I wrote until my fingers cramped. I wrote until the sun came up. I wrote stories that no one would ever read, pouring my heart onto pages that lived in a locked box under my bed. When I was 23, Julianne graduated from Columbia with honors. She immediately landed a literary agent, one of the best in New York, based on the strength of her thesis novel. The whole family flew out for her graduation, a trip I couldn't afford but was guilted into attending anyway. "Julianne is going to be published within the year," my mother announced at the celebration dinner, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. "My daughter, a real author. Can you imagine?" I could imagine. I'd been imagining it for myself my entire life. "What about you, Cassie?" my aunt asked, trying to include me in the conversation. "Any creative pursuits?" Before I could answer, Julianne laughed. "Cassie? Creative? She works at a grocery store, Aunt Linda. The most creative thing she does is arrange the produce display." Everyone laughed. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 20 minutes. Julianne's debut novel came out when she was 25. It was called The Gilded Silence, a literary fiction piece about a wealthy family's dark secrets. My mother bought 200 copies and sent them to everyone she'd ever met. The reviews were mixed. "Pretentious and overwrought," said Publishers Weekly. "Tries too hard to be profound," said Kirkus Reviews. "A promising but ultimately disappointing debut," said the New York Times. The book sold poorly. Very poorly. After the initial push from family and friends, it disappeared from shelves within 2 months. Julianne's agent dropped her. The publishing house declined to pick up her option for a second book. Julianne was devastated. And when Julianne was devastated, everyone around her suffered. She moved back to Portland, back into our parents' house, claiming she needed time to recover from the trauma of the publishing industry. She spent her days sleeping until noon and her nights drinking wine and complaining about how the world didn't understand her genius. I, meanwhile, had been promoted to assistant manager at the grocery store. I'd also started taking online writing courses in secret, learning about story structure, character development, and the business of publishing. I'd finished 3 complete novels and was working on my 4th. I'd even started submitting query letters to literary agents, using a pen name, of course. Cassandra Wren. A name that was mine but not mine, a persona that could succeed without my family ever knowing. And then came that Thanksgiving. I was 26 years old. Julianne was 29, still living at home, still bitter about her failed literary career. The whole family had gathered at my parents' house for the holiday, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, everyone. After dinner, while the adults were drinking coffee and the kids were playing video games, I made the mistake of mentioning that I'd been doing some writing. I don't even know why I said it. Maybe I was tired of being invisible. Maybe I wanted, just once, for someone to acknowledge that I existed as something more than the quiet one. "You've been writing?" my mother asked, her eyebrows raised in surprise. "Just some stories," I said quickly, already regretting opening my mouth. "Nothing serious." "Cassie's writing?" Julianne's voice cut through the room like a blade. She'd been sulking in the corner, nursing her 3rd glass of wine. "That's hilarious." "Julianne," my father said half-heartedly. "Be nice." "I'm being realistic." Julianne stood up and walked toward me, swaying slightly. "Cassie, sweetie, writing isn't something you just do. It's a calling. A gift. You either have it or you don't." "And I don't?" I asked quietly. "Of course you don't." She laughed. "Remember when I found your little notebook in high school? Liquid silver? God, I still cringe thinking about it." My face burned with humiliation. Everyone was watching. "I've gotten better," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Have you?" Julianne's eyes narrowed. "Show me." "What?" "If you've gotten so much better, show me what you've been working on. Let the family see." I shouldn't have done it. I knew I shouldn't have done it. But something in me, some deep, wounded part that had been silent for 26 years, wanted to prove her wrong. "Fine," I said. I went to my car and retrieved the notebook I'd been carrying everywhere, the one containing the handwritten draft of my 4th novel, a fantasy epic I'd been working on for 2 years. It was my masterpiece. My heart and soul. I handed it to Julianne. She opened it, scanned a few pages, and her expression shifted from mockery to something else. Something darker. "Where did you copy this from?" she demanded. "I didn't copy it from anywhere. I wrote it." "Impossible." She flipped through more pages, her face growing paler. This is actually good." For a moment, one brief, shining moment, I thought she was going to compliment me. I thought that maybe, finally, my sister would acknowledge that I had talent too. Instead, she walked to the fireplace. "Julianne," I said, my heart stopping. "What are you doing?" "You didn't write this," she said, her voice cold and venomous. "You must have plagiarized it from somewhere. There's no way someone like you, someone who stocks shelves at a grocery store, could write something this sophisticated. And I won't let you embarrass yourself, or this family, by pretending to be something you're not." She threw my notebook into the fire. The flames caught the pages instantly. 3 years of work, over 400 handwritten pages, began to curl and blacken. I could see my words disappearing, sentences I had labored over for months being consumed by orange and red. "No!" I screamed, lunging forward. My father grabbed me, holding me back. "Cassie, calm down. It's just a notebook. 3 years." I sobbed, watching the pages curl and blacken. That was 3 years of my life. Julianne watched the flames with satisfaction. "You're not a writer, Cassie. You're embarrassing yourself. I'm the talented one in this family. Accept it." I looked around the room at my family, my mother, who wouldn't meet my eyes, my father, who was still holding me back like I was the one who'd done something wrong, my aunts and uncles, who were shifting uncomfortably but saying nothing. Not one person defended me. I wrenched free from my father's grip, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. I didn't speak to my family for a year. That night, I drove home in a blur of tears and rage. I sat in my apartment, staring at the wall, feeling like everything I'd ever worked for had turned to ash. But then something shifted inside me. Julianne had burned my handwritten draft. But she hadn't burned the 3 complete novels saved on my laptop. She hadn't burned the query letters I'd sent out. She hadn't burned my talent, my determination, or my dreams. She'd just given me a reason to fight harder. I pulled out my laptop and started rewriting the 4th novel from memory. I stayed up for 72 hours straight, fueled by coffee and fury, reconstructing every scene, every character, every word that Julianne had tried to destroy. When I finished, the book was better than before. The fire had burned away the excess, leaving only what mattered. I sent query letters to 30 literary agents. Within 2 weeks, I had 12 requests for the full manuscript. Within a month, I had 6 offers of representation. I signed with the best agent in the industry, the same one who had dropped Julianne 3 years earlier. Her name was Margaret Sullivan, and when she read my manuscript, she called me personally. "This is extraordinary," she said. "I've been doing this for 30 years, and I can count on one hand the number of debuts that have moved me like this." "Who are you, Cassandra Wren?" "I'm someone who was told she'd never amount to anything," I replied. "And I'm about to prove everyone wrong." 6 months later, my debut novel sold at auction to a major publisher. There was a bidding war between 5 of the biggest houses in New York. The final number was $1.2 million, unheard of for a first-time author with no platform, no connections, nothing but raw talent and determination. The book was called The Ember Queen. It was a fantasy epic about a woman who rose from the ashes of her destroyed kingdom to build something greater than anyone had ever imagined. I dedicated it to everyone who was ever told they weren't good enough. The Ember Queen was released in October, exactly 1 year after Julianne burned my notebook. It debuted at number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list. It stayed there for 37 consecutive weeks. The reviews were rapturous. "A masterpiece of imagination," said the Washington Post. "The best fantasy novel of the decade," said NPR. "Cassandra Wren is a literary force to be reckoned with," said The New Yorker. The book sold 4 million copies in its first year. Foreign rights were purchased in 43 countries. Netflix bought the adaptation rights for 8 figures. I quit my grocery store job and bought a house overlooking the Pacific Ocean. My family had no idea. I'd published under my pen name, Cassandra Wren, and I'd deliberately avoided any publicity that would show my face. My author photo was a silhouette. My interviews were conducted via email only. I wanted to succeed on my own terms, without my family's shadow, or their sudden, convenient support. But I also wanted them to find out. I wanted them to discover my success in the most painful way possible. The opportunity came with my 5th book launch. By the time Crown of Ashes, my 5th novel, was set to release, I was one of the most successful authors in America. Each of my books had hit number 1. I had a devoted fan base of millions. I'd won 3 major literary awards and been named to Time's 100 Most Influential People list. My publisher planned a massive launch event at the flagship Barnes & Noble in Portland, my hometown. They hung a 20-foot banner with my face in the window. They flew in journalists from across the country. They expected over 1,000 people to attend. I'd done national TV interviews by this point, but always with strategic lighting and angles that made it hard to recognize me. I'd become famous for my reclusiveness. Critics called me the mystery author and speculated endlessly about my true identity. Some thought Cassandra Wren was a pseudonym for an already famous writer. Others thought I was a complete fabrication, a fictional persona created by a publishing house. The Portland event would be my first real public appearance. My first time showing my face to the world. I knew my family would hear about it. Portland wasn't that big. Word would spread. The local news was already covering the event, breathless about the fact that the elusive Cassandra Wren was actually from their city. What I didn't know was that Julianne would actually show up. The night of the launch, I stood in the back of the store, watching the crowd gather. Over 1,500 people had come, spilling out onto the sidewalk. Security had to turn people away. And then I saw her. Julianne walked through the front door, clearly expecting a small local event for some random author. She was probably planning to buy a book, get some free wine, and spend the evening feeling superior to whoever the featured writer was. Then she looked up at the banner. I watched her face as recognition dawned. The color drained from her cheeks. Her mouth fell open. She looked from the banner to the crowd to the stacks of books with my face on them. The store manager grabbed his microphone. "Welcome, everyone, to the launch of Cassandra Wren's 5th consecutive New York Times bestseller, Crown of Ashes." The crowd erupted in applause. Camera flashes went off everywhere. My fans were chanting my name. Julianne stood frozen in the middle of the chaos, people pushing past her to get better spots, completely oblivious to who she was. I watched the emotions play across her face: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, something that looked almost like physical pain. Our eyes met across the room. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I just looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in a year. This was my sister. The girl who used to read me bedtime stories when we were very young, before she became obsessed with being the talented one. The person who could have been my biggest supporter but chose instead to be my harshest critic. She turned and ran out of the store. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. All those years of being told I wasn't good enough, wasn't talented enough, wasn't worthy of the family's attention, and here I was, more successful than Julianne had ever dreamed of being. But watching her flee, I just felt empty. I gave my reading. I signed books for 4 hours straight. I smiled for photographs and gave gracious interviews. I was professional and charming and everything a best-selling author should be. Then I went home and sat alone in my beautiful house overlooking the ocean, wondering why success felt so hollow. I had everything I ever wanted. I was rich. I was famous. I was respected by critics and adored by millions of readers. My books were being translated into 43 languages. Movie stars wanted to be in the adaptation of my series. I'd been invited to the White House, for God's sake. But none of it mattered as much as I thought it would. Because success, I realized, isn't really about proving other people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that I started writing because I loved it, not because I wanted to show up my sister. The next morning, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize, but with a Portland area code. I answered. Cassie? My mother's voice, trembling. Cassie, is that you? I hadn't spoken to her in over a year. Yes. Julianne told us. About the bookstore. The banner. Is it true? Are you Cassandra Wren? Yes. A long pause. Why didn't you tell us? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. When was I supposed to tell you, Mom? When Julianne was burning my manuscript. When you stood there and watched? When not one person in our family defended me or told her to stop. We didn't know. You knew I'd been writing for years. You knew she threw my work into the fire. You knew she called me talentless and embarrassing. And you did nothing. My mother was crying now. We made a mistake, Cassie. A terrible mistake. But we're your family. Doesn't that count for something? I thought about that question for a long time. I spent my entire childhood being invisible to you, I said finally. I spent years being mocked and belittled and told that I would never amount to anything. And the one time I worked up the courage to share something I'd created, your golden child destroyed it in front of everyone. Family isn't supposed to do that to each other. Julianne wants to apologize. I don't want her apology. I took a breath. But I don't want to hate her forever, either. I don't want to hate any of you. It's exhausting. Then what do you want? I looked out at the ocean, thinking about all the stories I still wanted to write, all the words still burning inside me waiting to be released. I want to be seen, I said. Not as the successful one now, not as the famous one. I want to be seen as someone whose dreams mattered from the beginning. I want you to understand that I was always a writer, even when you refused to see it. Epilogue. My mother and I have coffee once a month now. It's awkward and painful and sometimes we don't know what to say to each other. But we're trying. My father sent me a letter, an actual handwritten letter, apologizing for not protecting me that night. It took me 3 months to respond. But I did respond. Marcus, my younger brother, reached out to tell me he always knew I'd do something amazing. He'd been reading my books since the first one came out, never knowing they were written by his own sister. We're actually close now, closer than we ever were growing up. And Julianne? She showed up at my door 6 months after the bookstore incident. She looked terrible, thin, pale, exhausted. She'd been in therapy, she said. Working through her jealousy, her insecurity, her desperate need to be the special one in our family. I was so afraid of being ordinary, she told me, tears streaming down her face. And when I saw that you weren't ordinary, that you were actually extraordinary, I couldn't handle it. I had to destroy it before anyone else could see it. You burned 3 years of my work, I said. I know. You told me I was worthless and embarrassing in front of our entire family. I know. You made me feel invisible for my entire childhood. I know. She was sobbing now. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you, if you'll let me. I didn't forgive her that day. Forgiveness isn't something you can give just because someone asks for it. It has to be earned. But I didn't close the door in her face either. My 6th book comes out next month, I said. The dedication is for Julianne, who taught me that fire doesn't destroy what's truly meant to burn. She looked up at me, confused. I almost smiled. Some things have to be destroyed before they can become what they were always meant to be. You burning that notebook was the worst thing that ever happened to me. It was also the best thing. Because it made me realize that no one else gets to decide whether I'm a writer. Only I get to decide that. Julianne nodded slowly. My new book is about 2 sisters, I continued. One who had everything handed to her and lost it all. One who had everything taken from her and built it all back, stronger. It's not our story exactly. But it's close. What happens at the end? I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw not the villain of my childhood, but a broken woman who had been just as trapped by our family's expectations as I had been. They figure out how to be sisters again, I said. It takes time. It takes work. But they get there eventually. Julianne wiped her eyes. Do you think we can get there? In real life? I thought about all the stories I'd ever written, stories about redemption, about second chances, about people who found their way back to each other against impossible odds. I'm a writer, I said finally. I believe in the power of new chapters. I stepped aside and let her in. My 7th book, The Sister's Keeper, debuted at number 1. It's dedicated to Jay, who finally learned to see me. Julianne has a copy on her nightstand. She's read it 4 times. She's also started writing again, not to compete with me, but because she finally realized that there's room in this world for more than one storyteller. Last month, she asked me to read her manuscript. I did. It was actually pretty good. I told her so. She cried. This time, they were happy tears.